Joining us now from the Eyes on Big podcast, it is the only Jeffrey the Greek. So glad to have you back, and I'm so glad that I have you on here. And we're talking about an Indiana football team that is, in fact, undefeated. To me, they look the part, and I know everybody loves to talk about the easy schedule, but they still dominate. And I want to talk a lot of big picture stuff with you here today. But first of all, glad to have you. It's been a few weeks, and this is going to be fun as always.
This is awesome. Reminds me of the 2021 season when Indiana was winning games. Hoosier football fans are some of my favorite Big Ten football fans because they don't expect big things. So when it happens, y'all are the happiest humans on the planet for your football team. So it's fun to even 5% enjoy the ride with you.
So just off the top, just one thing we talked about at the very beginning, you and you did it on your podcast too. You went through the schedule and you threw out the scenario that there were so many coin flip games early on that if things were going well, that they could indeed be in this position that they're in now. The biggest difference I feel like is I don't think anybody expected them to just look the part as much as they actually have.
No, it's funny because when Indiana was 3-0 and 4-0, I broke my arm multiple times, patting myself on the back, saying to people that I've been on the Hoosier train before everyone. However, I went back and looked at my predictions. I had you at 6-6. So at some point, I'm like, if I was on the train, I was on the caboose, and I hate to use trains with, excuse me, but with the Hoosiers, but it's even gone beyond what I had thought. Now, when Jordan and I, JW Eggleston 7, my podcast partner, when we broke down the Hoosiers in our team previews preseason, what I was trying to challenge our listeners to, and maybe Jordan a little bit, is look at this Hoosier schedule. You're into October, you're late October. There are no games on here that auto losses for the Hoosiers. That's what the message that I was trying to get across. With that being said, law of averages would say, through the first 7 games, maybe I could see 5-2, something like that. To actually think to be 7-0 and to be at this point ranked this high, even me as a non-Hoosier but Hoosier supporter, I didn't even give you guys enough credit. It's absolutely mind-boggling what Siggy has done and how this fan base has responded.
And I guess moving forward, obviously a big game with Washington this weekend. There's going to be a different dynamic this week specifically because we're going to see how they play with Taven Jackson. And not that we haven't gotten the Taven Jackson flavor before, whether it be some this season and even a little bit last year whenever Tom Allen was flipping and flopping between him and Brendan Sorsby. It is going to be interesting to see what he's able to do whenever there's actual pressure on him, because every situation that Taven's been in this year specifically, it's when the result's no longer in doubt. Indiana's already taken care of business. So I think if there's any worry with this week specifically, and if anyone who's paid attention to the Rourke injury, a lot of people are at least expecting that, like, for sure, you're not going to see him this week. You may not see him next week either, but I think past the Michigan State game, there's no doubt that unless something else happens after the fact, there's no reason Curtis Rourke shouldn't return by that point.
Yeah, I like the only real worries this weekend are the proverbial reading your own headlines deal. Feels like Siggy is pretty good at stamping that shit out pretty quick. He doesn't let that happen. And then, but you always have that a little bit. These are still 18 to 23-year-old, young humans that are susceptible. And then, the Taven Jackson, Curtis Rourke thing. Let me just say, I feel horrible for Curtis Rourke. I hate injuries every time they come, even to my rivals. This one even bugs the heck out of me because I think I've said, when you and I have talked and on the podcast, I've been a fan of Curtis Rourke since the Maction days. Dude's won me some money. Like, it was like a secret that nobody knew how good this guy was. So I would take overs and his team to cover all the time because Curtis Rourke was such a baller. He fights to get a name for himself in Maction, is brought over to the Big Ten, dominates, or just plays really well in the Big Ten. Now his stage is getting bigger. Game days in town. and you get hit with an injury. It's just a shot to the gut for him and his family, and everybody else that's helped him get to this point. So I feel horrible for the guy. With that being said, it's not like Taven Jackson isn't a great athlete. I think maybe it would be a skosh different offense that we see. And in a potentially really charmed season, maybe this winds up being a good thing in that now there's a little bit different offense for teams have to prepare for, as Taven Jackson might use his legs a little bit more, might even lean heavier into the RPO a little bit more because they're not the same quarterback. No human beings are ever the same quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see, but a real glass half full is maybe this winds up being another blessing in disguise for the Hoosiers.
What do you kind of see as maybe, and I know at least I've thrown around as the ceiling, and maybe the ceiling's extended a little bit more, but early on when things were going well for Indiana, we started throwing out like if things really go their favor the rest of the way and they're able to continue to execute, 11-1 isn't out of the question. It's almost expected, especially if you can get past this week with Taven Jackson at quarterback and bring back Curtis Rourke healthy the rest of the way. The fact that that is the expectation potentially is almost insane. I mean, and then if you are undefeated going into that Ohio State game towards the end of the year, that becomes, I mean, a game that nobody ever expected it to be. I mean, with the stakes on the line potentially at that point. And I know maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but at the same time, we are at that point in the year where you have to start looking at those types of things.
It's funny, before the season, everybody's projecting who gets into the college football playoff, who are the teams from each conference that are the best chances to get in the college football playoff. Everybody's, of course, throwing out Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, and Iowa. Well, Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State are still in it. Michigan and Iowa gone. Well, nobody. And then everybody just thought, well, there's nobody out there that could take the place of any of these teams should they falter. Or maybe Indiana and Illinois might be able to, because Illinois is in the running too. I don't think they'll beat Oregon, but if they should beat Oregon, look at their schedule. They're darn near a shoe-in for the playoffs. Even at 10-2, they would be a possibility for the playoffs. Even at 10-2, Indiana would be a possibility for the playoffs, but we would be looking at schedule situations and win qualities. But with that being said, 11-1 is very much on the table for Indiana, and I would go so far as to say Indiana is 11-1. They're in the college football playoffs, especially if it's a 11-1 with a 9-point loss to Ohio State. I don't think there's more that you need at that point. Like they would be in, and it would be an absolute travesty if they didn't. And in fact, it's an absolute travesty where they're ranked right now. They should be in the top 10. It's BS that I don't like the number that you're at right now. Bad, juju with that. I'll throw it out there because I'm not a Hoosier fan, but they should be higher right now. So hopefully as the wins stack up, a couple more teams drop down, Indiana would move high enough up in the rankings that even if there is a step back or two, it would still get you guys high enough to be in the college football playoffs.
There's a number of things, and I ranted about this earlier, and it's the fact that there are so many factors holding Indiana back from having a better ranking. First of all, you're Indiana. That's part of the factor. They assume that every win you're getting is because the other team is significantly worse than you. That's the first part. Second thing, you don't have that SEC logo on your jersey, and so you don't have that extra brand bump. And really just replace the name Indiana with any school that has a lick of respect, whether it be from the SEC or a good conference or not. They're a top 10 team if they don't have the Indiana name next to them.
Absolutely. Bias is real, and it's negatively affecting the Hoosiers right now. There's no doubt about it. Don't know what to say about it other than I totally agree. It ticks me off. It ticks me off as well. So again, there are things that can, fight through it in that it's such a good story. I think more and more people will become more and more aware. And if you keep winning, you take care of that. That's the best thing you can say is if you keep winning, you take care of that.
And I do kind of want to move into, I guess, one other thing before I get into more big picture stuff. But the other game that worries me outside of Ohio State, of course, is that other road game that Indiana has to go to at Michigan State. Obviously, you're an Iowa guy. You saw how tough it was against Jonathan Smith's team this past weekend. Do you see Michigan State in a couple of weeks with the fact that it is, in my opinion, it's Indiana's first true, real road environment? Because you did go on the road with Northwestern in their weird stadium where you did have a lot of Indiana fans there because of Chicago. And then you played in the Rose Bowl, which, again, it's a road environment, but it's UCLA.
Sure.
Not that they don't have fan support, but it is, again, it was a road environment. But Indiana in 2 weeks, or I guess at this point, a week and a half, they're going to face their first real road test to me.
That's a great point.
And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that works for them. If they're able to execute, if they're going to be rattled at all. So it's going to be interesting to see that.
That is a phenomenal point. Can I ask you a question real quick? Do we know the game time for that game yet?
I do not. So they don't even, I think it's either noon or 3:30. They haven't decided between the two. So thankfully it won't be a night game if you're Indiana with that.
There you go. That is what I was alluding to right there. My podcast partner, Jordan, is a Michigan fan. He clued me in on a couple things that came true, which is Cade McNamara has never played well in that stadium, and that going into the woodshed at night is a completely different animal than during the day. So good on the Hoosiers if you're getting them at noon or earlier in the day. It's maybe not quite as loud of an environment. But with that being said, until I see a reason to doubt the Hoosiers, I will keep believing in the Hoosiers. My thing that I'm looking at here is, we've already talked about Curtis Rourke out, Taven Jackson in, and then it's Hoosiers, but it should be spelled HWO-shers, because Justice Ellison, Tyson Lawton, Surratt, Cooper, Miles Price, Miles Cross, the entire defense. Who are these guys? They all look the same, especially on offense. I swear they all I swear they don't even switch the numbers. I can't tell, Ellison from Miles Price. They all look like a combination of a running back, wide receiver, type of thing. It's like a whole bunch of Debo Samuels. That's what Illinois looks like. And who are these guys? The Hoosiers. That's what I keep thinking about with these guys. So to me, I have so much trust in the whole offense and defense as a plan. I just saw one of your guys get interviewed on the Big Ten Network yesterday. He did a great job. You can tell there's just so much belief, with that team. So, Siggy's got him going. I feel confident on that, but every team could look a little bit different if you get a quarterback rattled. It would be awesome potentially if maybe Rourke could come for that game if healthy, but we'll see.
Is there any true hole that you see with Indiana right now? And I know that they've played very well, but if there's anything that you can see that a team can exploit, what do you think it is?
That could exploit with the Hoosiers?
Yes. Again, so I know I'm putting you on the spot. I didn't.
No. It would depend on the team. I'll say this much: I had seen a couple, leaks, gaps in the armor, if you will, defensively. I'm still wondering if you really run into an offense that's a well-oiled machine. I would like to see how that looks. I don't know if you've faced an offense quite that good. You talked about UCLA. They were struggling on offense when you met them. Northwestern has been struggling all year. So as far as the road games, Michigan State would be a step up. Obviously, Ohio State would be a gigantic step up with that. So that would be the one thing. But offensively, I feel like the Hoosiers could score on darn near anyone. You don't get this deep in the season. With that being said, let's hope that Taven Jackson stays healthy, until Curtis Rourke comes back. Because if you're dipping into the third string quarterback in any quarterback room, you're probably taking a step back offensively at that point.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at that as well. And looking more ahead to just kind of the big picture of the Big Ten in general, there's a lot of teams that are kind of vying for a spot in the title game right now. Of course, the unbeatens, Oregon, Indiana, Penn State. And then Ohio State and Illinois, kind of the other two that are not without question to be in that race. I saw somebody throw a scenario up the other day where there's a chance all of them in the season with one loss, which would be absolute pandemonium. And I mean, imagine 5 teams from the Big Ten getting into the playoff. I don't know if the committee would do that, but it'd be insane if that were the fact, or that were to in fact happen. But what scenario do you kind of see playing out, at least from this point in the season?
The funny thing is, our friend Jake Myers of the Get Back Coach podcast, we have been throwing these scenarios out since the summer. Because we weren't getting the Big Ten scenario and how these breakdowns were, and then him looking at it from the eyes of a Penn State fan, he's like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and assume a loss to Ohio State as a Penn State fan, but look at the rest of our schedule. We could be 11-1. Oregon could be 11-1. Ohio State could be 11-1. We had been talking about that. Now you add in Illinois and Indiana to it. So there's even more cooks in the kitchen, if you will, to make this crazy. It'll come down to tiebreakers, right? It seems like right now Oregon has the leg up on the whole Big Ten, but it only takes one slip up for them. Yeah. And all of a sudden it's even back out, for the whole conference. So I don't know. Like I've been telling people, this sure seems to be the year where we needed divisions than any other time, where at least you would come down to 2, maybe 3 teams in one division, but you would have more of a probable round robin on how that would go. Now we've got 4, 5, 6 teams that could be up there vying for to get to Indy. And then the bigger question, John, that's even crazier, what would you rather have as a Hoosier fan? Wouldn't you rather go ahead and be 11-1, sitting firmly in the college football playoff rankings, miss the Big Ten title game, and essentially assure yourself a spot into the college football playoffs? That question will be had for whatever that it'll probably, I would guess, wind up being 3 teams. I would guess like the max that we would wind up is 3 teams at 8-1 in the conference and probably 11-1 overall. You would have that one team that's held out and they might be happy about it.
And that's true, because at that point you don't have to play that extra game. Yeah, you probably wouldn't get as favorable of a draw when it comes to seeding just because you aren't playing in that title game. But at the same time, your guys are sitting out for an extra week, getting to heal up if you have any major injuries, that type of thing. Yep. So there's definitely some benefits to being that team that ends up getting left out if you do indeed end up being 11-1 and in that tiebreaker scenario. So I don't know,
John.
I haven't really thought that deeply about it.
John, I believe that you and I are both glass half full type of dudes. You're probably a winner either way. You get to the Big Ten title game. That's historic for your team, or you get to sit out and stay healthy. There's not a bad option there. As long as we're assuming that 3rd or 4th team in the Big Ten gets into the college football playoffs.
Yeah, because there is a real chance where if Indiana is 11-1 and they do make the Big Ten championship, there is a scenario where you're playing Ohio State for the second time in 3 weeks, if that ends up being the way that it plays out, of course, which would be a very odd scenario to have happen, of course.
Which, as people have been suggesting, is going to be the case with Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, all along. Like this is going to be impossible, nearly impossible to avoid all that often. Here's another scenario I've thrown out as you were talking there. Indiana, how about this? Maybe you wind up 8th in the college football playoff. Guess what that means? You're hosting a college football playoff game in Indiana. Maybe a Southern Fried team has to come into blustery Bloomington and Memorial Stadium in the middle of December. I mean, there is just some realistic but extremely fun things to consider if you're a Hoosier fan right now.
And it's super fun going through these scenarios. One thing I've been doing every Monday, Jeff, is that I've been going through the CFP projections on where they have Indiana currently slated, depending on who you look at, and just talking about the certain scenarios that could take place, whether that be hosting a Kalen DeBoer coached Alabama team at Memorial Stadium, which just sounds like complete bizarro world, or, going down to Knoxville and facing Tennessee, something like that. Again, all of this is yet to play out, and we're going to see how it ends up playing out over the next several weeks. But right now, it's just fun to be a part of the ride that you probably didn't expect to be on, and I hope it continues to carry us into deep November. We'll see.
Like I said, these are realistic dreams. So until somebody tells you different, keep dreaming it. That's what I'd do if I was you.
Jeffrey the Greek from the Eyes on Big podcast. I appreciate your time as always. And when we chat again, I mean, it'll be the twilight hours of the regular season. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's happened between now and then.
Thanks for having me on. Always a blast to talk to you.